Young Pyromancer here, and today I'm going to be doing a Rock Stun deck tech. So, to start off with, we have a Black Dragon. Black Dragon's a pretty beefy guy. He can't be normal summoned or set, and you can special summon him by banishing 3 Earth monsters from your hand and / or graveyard. But he can't be special summoned by any other way. Rock-type monsters you control can't be destroyed except by battle, and then when he's sent from the field to the graveyard, you can basically add 3 rock monsters to your deck whose total level is equal to 8. So usually just 2, because it's hard to get like 2 level 3s and a level 2. Like this deck doesn't play any level 2s. So just basically 2 monsters in this deck. He's alright. He's a pretty good boss monster, but because you really want to wait until later in the game to drop him, even if you have the option to go into him on turn 1, because all these guys, which we'll get to in a minute, they all require rock monsters to be in your hand to stay on the board. So that's why we only play 2 of them. Also, 2,500 isn't that much. 3,000 is a lot of defense to get through, but that's not very assertive in a deck that really seeks to be very assertive and ask your opponent to do something about what it's doing. So yeah. Then we move on to the main draw of the deck, the Koa'ki Meru monsters, the first of which is Koa'ki Meru Overload. This guy's really great. He basically negates any summon. Well, the Koa'ki Meru guys all have an effect where, like, during the end phase, you destroy them unless you send a Koa'ki Meru, an Iron Core of Koa'ki Meru from your hand to the graveyard, or you reveal a Rock-type monster from your hand. This deck doesn't play any Iron Core of Koa'ki Meru. It just plays Rock-type monsters, so you always want to have a Rock-type monster in your hand to reveal to this card. To these cards, which is why Black Dragon isn't really played as a 3-of or summoned as early as possible. But they can all tribute themselves during either player's turn to negate the activation of something and then destroy that card, and this guy negates summons. Just any summon, any normal summon, any special summon, really anything, which makes him really awesome. And I like him a lot, and he's definitely the best Koa'ki Meru in the deck. I play 3. I think pretty much every list should play 3, just because summoning monsters is how people win games, and if you can stop them from doing that, then I think you're going to be able to put yourself in a pretty good spot. Then we have Guardian. Guardian is kind of good. He's like Overload, but he can also negate monsters that activate in the hand or graveyard. So he's kind of like a debunk, and that's really cool. He does require your opponent. He's a little bit more narrow. In some ways, he's more of a side grade than anything else, but I only run 2. I could see going up to 3 if you really wanted to, especially because our next card, Sandman, only negates traps. And trap cards, it's a good effect in a vacuum, but trap cards in today's turn 1 metagame aren't super prevalent. And since this deck wants to go turn 1 a lot of the time anyway, this is probably the worst guy to get out in turn 1. So I could definitely see cutting him for the 3rd Guardian, and then just siding the 3rd copy, because I have 2 in my side deck right now. Paleozoics is a good reason to just mainboard 1 copy, so you can get it off of Ties of the Brethren on turn 1. But other than that, he doesn't really have a ton of utility, and he's pretty limited when you compare him to the other guys. Last Koa'ki Meru guy we have is Wall. Spell cards are super prevalent, especially with Pendulums. Like, I'm pretty sure this guy can negate Pendulums. So that's really cool. Not as prevalent as Summoning, obviously, which is why we only run 2, but, still pretty good. Depending on your metagame, I could also see cutting the Sandman for the 3rd Wall as opposed to the 3rd Guardian. But, yeah, it's definitely down to personal preference, and I just like a 3-2-2-1 split, personally. Then we have Tackle Crusader. Tackle Crusader is a pretty weird card. He's 15,000, 1,800 defense. He's 15,000 attack, 1,800 defense on a level 4, and he has the following effect. When it's sent to the graveyard from anywhere, so from the deck, hand, anywhere really, you can book a Moon a guy, you can turn into face-down defense position, or you can return a face-up spell or trap card to its owner's hand, and then that player can't activate that card until your next turn. So his job is to really get dumped with Foolish Burial or Catapult Zone, and really nothing else. He's just a good utility guy to have. Drawing him kind of sucks, but I think it's worth the cost of having him in the deck just to have that option with Foolish or Wreckball area. Then we have Double Fossil Dyna. Pretty standard. This deck only plays 2 because it actually nombos with a surprising amount of cards in the deck, such as Revival Golem, Ties of the Brethren, Black Dragon, or Block Golem. So yeah, that's why it only plays 2. It's definitely good at clearing your opponent's board, but you don't really want it out that often. It being a rock is is cool because you can get it out with ties, and then you can just, lock your opponent out if you want, which is pretty sweet. Revival Golem similar to the Tackle Crusader, but in that his effect triggers on when he's sent to the graveyard. So when he's sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can either add him to your hand or special summon him immediately from the graveyard. And basically, you only use this with Catapult Zone or Foolish Burial to go into a rank 4 if you really need to. The 21 defense is definitely handy though. It's a pretty beefy blocker if your opponent can't go into an extra deck monster on turn 1 or something. Then we have Block Golem. Block Golem's really good. Kind of a dead drawn if you're just bullying your opponent with Koa'ki Merus, but if they answered them somehow, or they tributed themselves to activate their effects, you can just activate Block Golem and get them right back, and the nightmare continues. He's also they can't use their effects that turn when you special summon them, and you have to have exactly 2, which is kind of annoying. But when it goes to your opponent's turn, you'll be able to activate their effects all you want. Also, he's pretty useful for just going into an instant rank 4 if you need to. Personally, I like leaving the Koa'ki Merus on the field a lot. I don't really get too much mileage out of the extra deck in this deck. Then we have one Neo Spacian Grandmole. Poor Grandmole, he's at 1. I think it's debatable whether he should be at 1. I could see him going to 2, and I think it'd be fine. Definitely make this deck a lot better. He's one of the best monsters in your deck, and he's your only real out in a lot of situations to big, giant extra deck monsters that your opponent slipped in under your Koa'ki Meru lock. I like him a lot. Sometimes if he's the only monster in your hand, that can be not great, but he's usually not. So yeah, definitely a very cool utility card. I wish I would probably play 2 if I could. Then we have Raigeki, because it's Raigeki. This deck, I like maining it in this deck, because this deck really wants to go first. I know a lot of decks really want to go first, but this deck super wants to go first to get its Koa'ki Meru lock established. And if it doesn't do that, then, sometimes it can have some problems if your opponent went ham turn 1. So Raigeki is one way of solving that. It's also just really good, blows up everything. It's just Raigeki. I'm not really too much else to say about this card. Then we have 3 Pot of Desires. This used to be Pot of Duality until I realized that Pot of Desires was one of the best cards in the game right now, and I was an idiot for not playing 3. Basically, this deck has search effects, sure. It has Ties of the Brethren, it has, monsters you want to pitch with Rockfall Area, but banishing 10 cards is not a high cost. It's not even a card advantage cost in any sense of the word. It's literally just a free +1. It's just Pot of Greed with a downside, and I think it's debatable whether that downside is, medium or small. I think it leans towards the smaller end of the spectrum, but for a lot of decks it can be pretty huge. But for this deck it isn't. So that's why I play 3. It's just really good. We live in a world where if you build your deck right, you can play 3 Pot of Greeds. It's awesome. Then we have another one of the best cards in the deck, Ties of the Brethren. This lets you pay 2,000 life points, then target a level 4 or lower monster you control. After you activate this card, or after it resolves rather, you can't special summon monsters, but then you can special summon 2 monsters from your deck with the same type, attribute, and level as that monster. But then you can't do your battle phase. So basically, you use this with the Koa'ki Meru guy on turn 1 to either get basically the combination of cards you want to get on turn 1 with Ties of the Brethren is Overload and / or Guardian, depending on what your opponent is playing, or what you're worried could break your lock, or would just be really good against your hand. Wall, and Fossil Dyna. And then your opponent can't do anything. Since Fossil Dyna is special summoned at the same time as all the other guys, he doesn't prevent their special summoning. And since he's not being flip face up, the monsters you just special summon don't get popped. So yeah, cool. Really cool. Like it a lot. Definitely a game winner on turn 1 if you can get it out right. Kind of like ABC, the ABC boss monster in that respect. Soul Charge. Soul Charge is really good. You just get back all your Koa'ki Merus from the graveyard. And then you can go into a bunch of Xyz plays, or your opponent just doesn't get to do anything, and then you run over them next turn. I'm a little more iffy in this deck than some other decks, mainly because this deck doesn't use its extra deck for a lot of plays, and that's really where Soul Charge shines. If you're getting huge mileage out of your extra deck. But I'd still Soul Charge, so the floor is pretty low. I could see cutting it for something else in the future, though. Call me crazy, but I would consider cutting it for maybe the 3rd wall, or something weird like that. I don't know. Upstart Goblin, just make your deck 39 cards. 1,000 Another card I can consider cutting, just because you have a lot of deck thinning with Pot of Desires already, and if in a beatdown deck, sometimes 1,000 life points can be a downside, but it's never a really huge downside. I don't think I've ever lost a game to my opponent gaining 1,000 life points from Upstart Goblin, and it's just a good way to thin the deck. Totally optional though. Another card I could see cutting for another Koa'ki Meru Guardian, or something like that. It's definitely a card I side out a lot, along with Soul Charge, just to bring in more matchup relevant threats. Then we have Foolish Burial. Foolish Burial is a pretty good utility card. You can dump Black Dragon for instant special summonings, or either of the cards for Block Golem, or Revival Golem, or Tackle Crusader for just pretty decent utility based plays. One of my favorite cards in the game. I would say it's pretty good in this deck. Definitely not at its best, but still fairly decent. Then we have Diamond Core of Koa'ki Meru. This is your main searcher. It's your virtual Rhoda for all your guys that matter. And it even has the upside of, you can banish it from your graveyard, and that turn, Koa'ki Meru monsters you control cannot be destroyed. By battle, by card effects, just by anything really. So that's really sweet, because if your opponent tries to get out of the lock with an effect you don't have a lock piece for, like you have a Overload, a Guardian, and a Sandman out for whatever reason, and then they try and Raigeki you can just banish Diamond Core, and they're like, fuck. So yeah, pretty sweet card, like it a lot, Rhoda with upside. Doesn't tutor everything in the deck, which is unfortunate, because there's some pretty good non-Koa'ki Meru or rock monsters in this deck, but very serviceable, and I'm a big fan. Mystical Space Typhoon. Now, this versus Twin Twisters is a pretty big point of contention. In the older versions of this list, that didn't have Pot of Desires, that only had Pot of Duality, I had MST in here, because this deck didn't really have any ways to gain card advantage on your opponent, because you were using your normal summon to stop them from doing things. And if you discard an extra card, that could sometimes mean the difference in a long game, especially in a game, in a deck where you want to have cards in your hand to reveal to Overload. So, because you want, or Overload and its piles. So, because you want cards in your hand pretty consistently throughout the game, and you can't really just discard them willy-nilly, I still prefer MST in this current build of the deck. I think Twin Twisters is not strictly better, but defensible, and that you could totally play it if you want. This deck is very customizable, very user-tailorable in that sense. But I definitely just prefer the original MST for this deck specifically. I still think Twin Twister is just like a better card on average than MST. Then we have Solidarity. This card is like another one of the best cards in the deck. As long as you only have one type of monster in your graveyard, all monsters you control with the same type gain 800 attack. And when your average attack of a monster you control is 1900, suddenly you have a bunch of 2700 attack monsters that prevent your opponent from doing anything. So they pass the 2500 test, which is the power toughness of like the average Xyz play that you have to care about. And so they just, you beat your opponent down with your big guys, that stop them from making plays, and it's pretty sweet. Doesn't help your guys get over Dragon Busters or anything like that, though, which is unfortunate. But you have outs to that, namely in the form of a Foolish Burial into Tackle Crusader. There are not many, but they exist. Dragon Buster on turn 1 is just pretty fucking hard for anyone to deal with, so don't feel bad for not, being able to, deal with that play, because not a lot of decks can. Then you have Rockfall Area, or Catapult Zone. The Rockfall Area is the OCG name, I believe. It's a field spell. Once per turn, when a monster you control would be destroyed by battle, you can pitch a rock-type monster from your deck to the graveyard instead. This is good for, it's a little slow, but it protects your life points, it protects your monsters that you want on the field so they can activate their effects when your opponent tries to go for big plays. And it can dump value good guys like Revival Golem or Tackle Crusader or Black Dragon. And it fuels the graveyard for Block Golem, and it turns on Solidarity. Pretty good utility. Sometimes it can definitely be a dead draw, especially if your opponent isn't putting you on the back foot, and you draw this. If you're in a pretty good spot already, it doesn't really do a lot, which is unfortunate, but I'd rather have cards that are good when you're behind rather than good when you're ahead, and this card is definitely one of those cards that are better when you're behind. definitely not essential to the function of the deck in any way, shape, or form. That's why we don't run Terraform and Tutor for it, just because it's not really a cornerstone of the deck. Then we have our 2 limited traps, Vanity's Emptiness and Skill Drain. Vanity's Emptiness is really good, just because it's like Fossil Dyna. It's basically your 3rd copy of Fossil Dyna that isn't vulnerable to removal by battle, but it is kind of a nombo in this deck. It's not at its best in this deck, simply because if your opponent makes a play that you want to tribute your Koa'ki Meru guys for, it just stops you from making them. It just goes away. Also, if you want to use Ties of the Brethren to get a formidable board state or summon a Black Dragon or something like that, then you can't do that. Also, it pops itself when you activate spells, just one of spells, which also really sucks. But you can definitely get people with it, and if you can get people in a position where they have no board state and their normal summon monsters can't really get over a 1900 attack, and you activate Vanities and they don't really have any way to deal with that, then you win the game. Again, another card that's not really super essential to the function of the deck, especially because you have so many really other ways to stop your opponent from going into high impact special summon plays, that I could totally see cutting this from the 55 if you wanted to. But it's a personal preference. I don't mind having it in the deck, even if it is a little annoying sometimes, because I believe the upside is high enough. Then we have Skill Drain. Oh boy. Man, Skill Drain. So good in this deck. So good in this deck. So, basically the way Koa'ki Meru monsters work is they tribute themselves as cost, and then since they're no longer on the battlefield, their effect doesn't activate on the field, so Skill Drain can't stop it, meaning you can still activate the Koa'ki Meru effects if you want to, which is sweet. It works the same way with Block Golem, and works the same way with Revival Golem, and works the same way with Tackle Crusader, because none of those effects activate on the battlefield. The only real nombo with the deck card is Grandmole, because Grandmole effect very much activates on the field, and will stop it from the 2 monsters crashing into and bouncing each other back. But other than that one single card in the deck, Skill Drain works super good with every other card in the deck, and it also works super good with Crazy Box. It's the only reason Crazy Box is in the extra, and it's awesome. One of the best cards in this deck for sure. I wish it was at 2 for this deck specifically. I can see why that would be super aggravating to play against, but who knows? If Zodiacs are too good and they, up the Skill Drain numbers to compensate for that, we could have a pretty good deck on our hands over here. So yeah, super cool card. I would consider it core to the essential of the deck. So now before we go to the extra deck, I would just like to go over what I personally consider the core of the deck to be, because it's very customizable. And the extra deck is totally up to personal preference in basically every way possible. So the core of the deck I would consider to be definitely 3 Koa'ki Meru Overloads, 2 to 3 Guardian, and then 2 to 3 Wall, 2 Fossil Dyna, 3 Block Golem, 1 Grandmole, 1 Raigeki, 3 Potted Desires, 3 Ties of the Brethren, 3 Iron Core, 3 Solidarity, 2 Catapult Zone, 2 Catapult Zone, and Skill Drain. Also Revival Golem and Tackle Crusader to get into off your graveyard base plays. So yeah, that's the core of the deck. I'll post it in the description below. But everything else basically is customizable, so go nuts. I'm not going to tell anyone to stop you. Pot of Duality, by the way, if you're concerned about Pot of Duality being $1 billion, because it is, roughly. Sorry, Pot of Desires being $1 billion, because it is. You can play Pot of Duality as a valid replacement. It works fine in this deck. I've had experience playing with it in this deck, and it works just fine. So yeah. No shame in playing Pot of Duality over Pot of Desires, though if you can get your hands on Pot of Desires, it is just straight up better. Basically every way. Doesn't stop your Ties of the Brethren plays, adds 2 cards, is Pot of Greed, that's a pretty big upside. So yeah. Or if you wanted to play safe, you could also play Pot of Duality, but I don't think that argument really holds salt, because 10 cards feels like a lot, but it really is only 10 cards. So yeah. Now we're going to move on to the extra deck. We have a bunch of level 3s that you don't really go into, because you want to tribute this guy. You're only level 3, aside from Grandmole, to get back level 4s. So you don't really go into these too often. I think 3 is probably a little too much. Probably don't need that much utility, but it's not like the extra deck is super essential to the deck's function, so it doesn't really matter. So we got Giant Soldier of Steel, I'm just going to be going over these briefly because you don't really go into them, and you can read their effects as I go if you feel like. So you got Giant Soldier of Steel, Gorgonic Guardian, Soul of Silvermountain, and number 30 Acid Golem of Destruction. Then we have some various staple rank 4s, Castel, Silent Honor Arc, Utopia, Utopia Lightning, and Darker Brilliant Xyz Dragon. Then we have some more flex spot picks like Gagaga Cowboy, Giant Hand. Google Goliath is actually not a staple at all. He's just good for basically grinding out advantage if you have something like a Block Dragon or a Catapult Zone in play. This guy is really good to go into just because he can bury your opponent in card advantage. So yeah, really sweet. Then we have Cairn, the Anti-Luminescent Knight. Sometimes you can go into him if you're afraid of removal, but should be in a position where removal isn't going to be that good against you anyway, so you don't go into him too often. Darker Billion Xyz, etc., etc. Then we have Gem Knight Pearl, which is only in this deck because he is both a rock and an earth type monster. So usually a big cost of going into non-earth rock extra deck monsters in this deck is that it will permanently turn off one of the best cards in your deck, Solidarity. Gem Knight Pearl doesn't do that, and he gets buffed from Solidarity too. So yeah, he's just a giant guy that you can go into if you need to get over a 3,000 attack monster or something out of Blue Eyes or whatever. So yeah, that's why he's in the deck. Crazy Box for the same reason. If you need a big guy, just go into, and you have Skill Drain on the field, just go into this guy and you'll probably win the game on the spot, unless your opponent deals with Skill Drain somehow, in which case you're really out of luck. 3,000 attack is just way more than most decks can put out. So yeah, you just go into it if you need a big dude. Though, a lot of times Gem Knight Pearl is just better than this guy if you have a Solidarity even under a Skill Drain. And then Utopia the Lightning you get off Utopia. If you need to if you need to ram into a super big guy. And yeah, so that's the deck. Yeah, let's go over the side deck, I suppose. I know this isn't going to be relevant to a lot of people, so you can feel free to skip this portion of the video if you want, but I prefer to have a side deck in every one of the decks I construct. Simply because I like playing matches more than individual games. I think that sideboarding is a really deep facet of the game, and especially if you play in real life, something that's very important to practice, even when you're just playing on Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro. So yeah, I'm going to go over that. So basically we have 2 Koa'ki Meru Sandman for Card of Demise decks, because those decks heavily abuse trap cards, or Paleozoics, which is a tier 1 deck right now. I'm just going to... Yeah, sorry. So yeah, you side in 2 of these against Paleozoics, and you try and find them with Ties of the Brethren, or whatever. And then you, attempt to stop them. And you attempt to stop their trap plays. It's a decently effective means of doing it, but even here it's kind of outclassed by Royal Decree. But I just like having 2 more of the effects that are tutorable with Ties of the Brethren. So yeah, and our Diamond Core. Then we have Wall against Pendulum decks. You just bring in the 3rd wall from the side deck. Trap Tricks or Felicia if you're on the play, and I just like sliding her and 2 bottom Floodgate Trapple into my main deck, just so you can capitalize the advantage of being on the play by being able to either go into her turn 1 or set Floodgate on turn 1. So yeah, if you feel like you need the Floodgate effect in the matchup consistently, I side this guy in, and then I side 2 Floodgate in. I usually side out a Upstart Goblin and a Soul Charge, or some number of MST depending on the matchup. Then we have System Down for ABCs, just blows up all machine type monsters in their hand and graveyard. It just straight up fucking banishes them, so ABCs can go eat a huge sack of shit. 3 Prohibition. I basically side this in every match. I would main it, but the deck is very turn 1 oriented, and you want to know what to name on turn 1 blindly, so I usually wait until game 2 to bring this in. Obviously the effect varies, but if you shut off like Buster from ABCs, or that new 3500 attack dinosaur monster, Superconductor Tyranno or whatever it's called, from the new dinosaur deck, can really just take the wind out of their sails and make them unable to really beat your dinky 1900 attack guys. 2 Floodgate, as I discussed, for Felicia, 2 Royal Decree for Paleozoics, 2 Lightning Presenting Mirror for Blue Eyes, and APCs. And yeah, that's the deck. I hope you enjoyed it. This is my first deck tech ever, so I may be not too great at this yet, and I would appreciate any feedback or criticisms you could give me. Subscribe if you feel like it. I'm really just going to be doing these videos for fun, because I like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic the Gathering a lot, and so I wanted to produce video content for them. If you would like to just subscribe, that's really cool of you, and I appreciate it, but don't feel any obligation to. Yeah, so that's the deck. Let me know if you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you guys next time.